So, let's talk about something huge, something that affects every single one of us: population. The big question is, as our numbers grow, are we heading for a crisis, or could more people actually be a good thing? Let's dive in.
At the heart of this whole debate is a really basic, almost primal fear, isn't it? Will we run out of food? I mean, for centuries, people have looked at our growing numbers and wondered, can this planet actually keep up with all of us?
And when it comes to a question this big, you're going to have two very different schools of thought. On one side, you've got the pessimists, the people who see a disaster right around the corner. And on the other, you've got the optimists, who are totally convinced that our own creativity will save the day.
Think of it like a heavyweight match of ideas. In this corner, you've got Thomas Malthus. His big idea, that our population is going to grow so fast it'll completely outstrip our food supply, leading to a total crisis. And in the other corner, you have Esther Boserup. She argued the exact opposite, that a growing population is what forces us to get smarter and find new solutions.
So Malthus's idea was pretty straightforward, and honestly, kind of grim. He saw that population tends to grow exponentially, 2, 4, 8, 16. But our ability to grow food, that only grows linearly, 1, 2, 3, 4. He saw a collision course, one that would inevitably end in famine, disease, and war. Not a pretty picture.
But then, you fast forward a couple of centuries, and along comes Esther Boserup, who just flips that whole idea on its head. She said, hold on a minute. That pressure for more people, that's not a bad thing. It's actually the main reason we innovate. When we're squeezed for resources, that's when we're forced to get creative and invent new technologies. Basically, necessity is the mother of invention.
Okay, so we've got these two epic opposing ideas. It's a great debate. But theories are one thing. What happens in the real world? To really figure out who was closer to the truth, we need to look at a real-world test case.
And you know what? There was probably no better place on Earth to test these ideas than India. Over the last century, it's seen one of the most incredible population booms in all of human history. It's basically the perfect laboratory for this whole debate.
Just get a load of this. You can see how things started out kind of slow, chugging along for a few decades, and then, right around the middle of the 20th century, boom. The line just rockets almost straight up. The scale is just mind-blowing. So let's put some numbers to that. Back at the start of the 20th century, India's population was sitting at around 238 million. Now, that's a lot of people, for sure, but it was really just the beginning of the story. Because today, that number is over 1.3 billion. That is a more than five-fold increase in just over a century. That's not just growth, that's an explosion. Just let that sink in for a second. So you're probably asking, how on earth did that happen so fast? Well, it's actually a pretty classic story in demographics. Step 1. Amazing improvements in healthcare, sanitation, and medicine meant that death rates just plummeted. People started living way longer. But, and this is key, birth rates didn't drop at the same speed. And that growing gap between the number of people being born and the number of people dying, that's what lit the fuse on the population boom. Okay, so people were living longer. That makes sense. But why did birth rates stay so high for so long? Well, a whole bunch of really powerful social and cultural factors were at play. Things like traditions of early marriage, cultural norms that favored having big families, and for a long time, not a lot of access to family planning. Plus, there was often a social preference for having sons, which could lead to larger families. All right, so this massive growth obviously didn't happen in a vacuum. It created some pretty enormous challenges. And this is where we can really start to see whether a future looks more like a Malthusian crisis or a story of Boserupian innovation. And at first glance, it looks like a slam dunk for Malthus, right? I mean, you can see his predictions playing out. All those people put a huge strain on natural resources, water, food, a place to live. It created environmental problems, made it tough to create enough jobs, and really put the pressure on hospitals and schools. This looks a whole lot like the crisis Malthus was worried about.
But hold on, that's not where the story ends. Because just as all that pressure was building, something incredible happened. People started to respond. As it turns out, humanity adapts. And this is where Esther Boserup would say, I told you so. Faced with a very real crisis, India innovated, big time. This sparked the Green Revolution, a complete transformation of agriculture with new crop varieties and farming methods that massively boosted the food supply. But it wasn't just that. The government also rolled out huge family planning programs. And maybe most important of all, there were major pushes to educate girls and empower women, which we now know are some of the most powerful ways to stabilize population growth.
So, what's the final verdict? Who was right, Malthusian or Beau syrup? Well, the truth is, they both were. Kind of. India's story shows us that the Malthusian pressures are absolutely real. You can't ignore them. But the Beaucerupian ability to innovate and adapt is just as real. Reality, it turns out, is just way more complicated than any one theory. And that leaves all of us with a huge question to think about. As we look at our own future, will the pressures of our population lead us to collapse, or will they push us to create a smarter, better, more sustainable world? The story of India suggests the answer isn't written in stone. It seems that the choice is really up to us.